off all by itself. It does it itself. Okay?
Yeah, you're right there with me though.
Every time I open the hangar door to go flying, I realize that I'm one of the lucky guys doing something that I dreamt of as a kid.
September 29, 1938, Hap Arnold became Chief of the Army Air Corps. With Andrews, he briefed General Marshall on the air facts of life. On the day following Arnold's appointment, the Munich Agreement was signed. Without firing a shot or dropping a bomb, Hitler's military machine had won for him a great victory. But Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain thought he had achieved peace. Peace in our time. The very next day, 500 German aircraft assisted in the invasion of the Sudetenland. By appeasement, Hitler had conquered Czechoslovakia.
Munich taught America a great lesson. In international diplomacy, as in poker, you can't win if someone else holds all the aces. So in 1939, the Air Corps began to expand, to give the nation minimum air protection. And young Americans came to Texas to learn how to walk in the flight boots of air heroes like Thomas Selfridge, Eddie Rickenbacker, and Billy Mitchell. For advanced training, we sent the fledgling flyer to nearby Kelly Field. There, he flew an AT-6.
An American aircraft company, North American Aviation, built more than 17,000 versions of this airplane beginning in 1935. As a pilot training aircraft, it's been used mostly by the United States, Britain, and Canada, but more than 60 countries worldwide have flown it on various missions. The U.S. military started training its pilots in this sturdy, capable plane during World War II. The Army Air Corps and later the U.S. Air Force called it the T-6, then the AT-6 for Advanced Trainer. The Navy called it the SNJ, and for many years, naval aviators carrier qualified in it. The British and Canadians called it the Harvard. American pilots trained in the T-6 for over 30 years. The United States and many other countries modified the T-6 for combat and other missions. American T-6s flew forward air control missions in both the Korean and Vietnam wars. More than 600 T-6s are privately owned in North America. Many people think that because it's a trainer, that it's easy and comfortable to fly, that it's forgiving of pilot errors. The opposite is true. Connie Edwards, an iconic American aviator, says that as an advanced trainer, it was designed not to be easy to fly. In fact, he suggested that if a pilot wants to fly it, they should first fly the Navy Bearcat, then the P-51 Mustang, then move to the T-6, where they might have better luck with the tricky ground handling. This T-6, in a ditch just off the runway, was the result of loss of control on landing. One pilot suggests that as a tail dragger, you have to fly it until it's in the hangar. The plane flies regularly in American air shows to tell a story of the Japanese Pearl Harbor attack on December 7, 1941. T-6s are painted with Japanese markings to imitate the Japanese Zero fighter. And the Shell Aerobatic Team flies the T-6 in daytime air shows. and nighttime air shows. The T6 will be with us for decades to come. Morning, everybody. Good morning. And our T6 team is on its way out. Gosh, thanks. Good to see you all.
All right.
Alex? So here's our T6 team. Starting for the audience at your far right is Mike Ginter. Oh, you know him. He's the president of NATA, North American, more applause for NATA, yeah. Former naval aviator, 5 deployments, Persian Gulf, 3,000 hours in the cockpit, 555, the Navy calls them traps, that's arrested landing on aircraft carriers. Got 1,000 hours in the SNJ, which is the T6, as you all know. 2015, in Washington, D.C., VE Day celebration, he directed and led the flyover of 56 airplanes down the mall, all warbirds. Any of you happen to see that or were there in Washington that day? It was magnificent, Mike. Sitting next to him, Alan Henley, co-founder of the Aeroshell team you just saw on the screen. 27 years of flying air shows and 4,000 hours in the SNJ. My gosh. Next to him, Brigadier General George Schulstad, 6,200 hours, Air Force retired, 25 years service. He flew exchanges in the F-86 with the RCAF and flew the F-8U Crusader in an exchange with the Navy as a naval aviator, and he flew in Vietnam and the Tonkin Gulf. That's
He's a good
General
man.
George Schulstad. And next to me, retired Major General Alex McDonald, 9,000 hours in the cockpit, 45 years of service, many types of aircraft, props, and jets, is a very highly decorated retired Air Force officer, General McDonald. Mike, start us off. First of all, NATA. What does NATA do?
Well, thank you for hosting this for us. North American Trainer Association is the T6, T28, P51, and B25 type club. And we also are the formation formation training signatory for T6s, T28s, and P51s. So we are the folks that we've got about 1,000 members. The organization's been around since 1985. It started out as the T6 Association, and then our 31 years of leadership under Kathy and Stoney Stonich, they changed it to NATA and brought in the T-28s and the rest of the North American aircraft, and it became a big family. And the last couple of years, we grew by about 28%, and we brought in the fighter signatories. So NATA now trains all the T6s, T-28s, and all the fighters, not just Mustangs.
So how big a day is this for trainer aircraft?
Well, it's a great day. Today's really a NATA day for us to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the T6. And working with the great folks here at EAA Warbirds, they gave us about an hour of today's air show. And as the president and a former naval officer, I've always believed what good's a little authority unless you abuse it a little bit. So I convinced them to let me make it a family birthday party, not just T6s, but we brought the whole family in. So today's air show, you're going to see about 63 North American aircraft, starting at about 3:30. About halfway through the show is the NATA part. And the T6s will be featured, but we're going to have fighters, B-25, and a bunch of T-28s.
Mike, how significant is this airplane? You just mentioned the big anniversary of this airplane, but how significant is it and has it been for all these decades?
Well, I'll introduce that answer, but these gentlemen can probably do a much better job. The T6, about 17,000 built, and I think the number varies, but it's a lot. And it was the trainer aircraft for just about every pilot in World War II, and I think up to 34 Allied nations during and after the war. So it was in military service with the Spanish Air Force until the 80s and the South African Air Force until the 90s. And that's the reason why so many were well maintained, and when they were surplused into civilian hands, a lot of folks bought them and brought them back to the States. So we've got 600 left. It's a significant part of the military aviation training history. I'll defer to the generals for more on that, but and to Alan, of course, but it's a huge part of it. Everybody knows the T6, air shows and the military guys. It's an iconic airplane. Proud to be a part of the association.
Alan, in your 4,000 hours in this airplane, how do you describe this airplane compared to flying others?
You know, it's an airplane that, flown correctly, it's a wonderful, it's actually, once you kind of get the hang of it, it's a very docile airplane. We like to think it is. It's a wonderful trainer. It's got so many great features that it makes you work hard at the things you need to work hard on, like directional control. But it's a very pleasing airplane to fly. The controls are very harmonic. Some of the other fighters I've flown, they may be heavy rudder and light ailerons or something, But the T6, everything is very harmonic. Nothing's real stiff. Nothing. It's just a really pleasing airplane to fly in the air.
I think most of us are amazed watching, the Aeroshell team that you co-founded fly these shows not only during the day but at night as well. Describe that experience for us of that kind of formation flying that tight, that close, and at night.
We're in our 33rd year together as a team, and we started doing the day show. Probably did that for about 10 or 12 years, and then started doing a late evening performance, kind of right at sundown. And we've started realizing that, first of all, it was a pleasure to fly at that time of day because it's starting to cool off and the wind and the turbulence disappears, and it's just really smooth and it's fun to do. I always tell people, I say, we do the day show to earn the privilege to do the night show. And but it's kind of an optical, I wouldn't say an optical illusion, but at night when we're flying the show, you're looking up at us and the airplanes are kind of dark looking. We're actually, from a height advantage, your whatever sunlight that's left actually hits the ground and bounces back to us. So we can actually see better from our advantage than the crowd can looking up at the airplanes. And so even though it's really starting to look kind of dark, things are still somewhat illuminated on the ground. So it's not like we're flying black dark. We do more what they call a twilight show, and there is some residual light left over. So we can still see the ground and see each other. It's just fun.
Just fun. To use your term, as long as you fly it correctly.
Exactly.
Mike, you had an experience in the back seat flying formation one of these?
Well, I did. I actually had the honor of riding in the back of Alan's brother, Mark Henley. I rode in the back of his airplane at a friend of ours' air show down in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And I was actually still in command of a squadron, so I was an active duty Navy guy still flying, and I kind of had Navy regulations on the brain, but I was able to jump in the back seat of your brother's airplane, and he was on the right wing, and I'm used to a brief 90 minutes prior, very structured, and you follow the rules and regulations, and these guys were hanging out with their elbows on the wing, the horizontal stabilizers, and said, "All right, you guys are ready to go," and I thought, okay, great, ready to have a brief. And Mark said, "Come on, let's load up." So that was the brief. And of course, these guys breathe together. They're so incredible. You've all seen them. But So I got in the back seat, and it was the most incredible experience of my life. First thing Mark and Steve did, I guess Steve was on the left wing, they take off and step up. And if anybody's flown formation, we always teach step down, so that when the leader turns into you, you're already below the wing and you can stay safe. And it's a step down. You've seen it in all the videos. These guys step up on the wings, so they're looking down at the lead. And when the lead turns into you, you got to turn a lot quicker to stay above him but not lose sight. And then they did that doing an aileron roll and a barrel roll and a loop. So I told Mark when we landed, I'm really glad, and here I was, a jet guy in command of a squadron. I kind of know a little bit what's going on. I'm glad they removed the stick in the back seat, because I told Mark I would have saved us about 20 times.
Alex, General Alex, when was your first meeting with a T6?
It's kind of interesting. On World War II, you started out with the PT, and you went to the BT, and then you went to the AT, which was the AT-6. When George and I got to Goodfellow Air Force Base, Texas, in 1951, they showed us the AT-6 and said, "This is the airplane you're going to start flying." So we started in that airplane, and flew it all the time. We were at Goodfellow.
So what was it like to begin in that particular airplane without the other planes that you mentioned?
Well, I didn't know the difference. So my instructor was a second lieutenant that hadn't graduated very much before I started. And he was very forgiving and very understanding. And when he finally soloed me out, I took off and turned around and checked the back seat to make sure he wasn't hiding back there to protect me. But it was a great experience and a great airplane, and I was privileged to fly it in Korea in combat. At the time, I didn't think it was a privilege. But
we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. Yeah, we will for sure. George, you're also at Goodfellow in Texas?
Right, absolutely. In 1951, reported into Goodfellow Air Force Base at San Angelo, Texas. I had gone through Lackland as a private, so when I reported in, became an aviation cadet in pilot class 52A. The monthly pay went from $49 to $75 a month, which was a good deal. But got in the airplane. My instructor was First Lieutenant George M. Lake from Santa Ana, California, right out of Central Casting. Tall, fair-haired, good-looking guy. Been in World War II for the last few months of it. Had been in combat down in the Pacific, and so he had visions of going to jet school and going over to Korea and becoming an ace. Instead, he finds himself as an instructor pilot in the back seat, teaching us green guys how to fly an airplane. So it was my first time ever in an airplane in the front seat. He said, "Just follow me through on the controls. Don't try to do anything." We took off, went about 2-3 miles away from the air base. There was a ravine there. He took it right down to the cactus, turned it upside down, pushed forward on the stick. All the stuff came off the floor down on me, and he said, "Now, you little blankety blank, I'm going to teach you how to fly an airplane." And that he did, for which I'm forever grateful. He was a taskmaster. He absolutely insisted on everything being done perfectly, or you just kept on doing it until you did it perfectly. So I'm really grateful to Lieutenant George M. Lake from Santa Ana, California. Yeah.
Well, Alan talked about flying the airplane correctly, and Mike, yeah. Mike? Oh, the thinking about the ground handling qualities, and we hear that it can be squirrely or whatever on the ground. To what extent have any of you had those kinds of problems in handling the T6 on the ground?
I was lucky I never did. Never had a problem.
I never had a problem, but I've had a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
In 4,000 hours, I never scratched it one time, but I've had it try to a time or two. You come in, the wind's blowing, 90 miles, and come in there and crosswind, you just drive it on and get it on the ground. And like I say, you never stop flying it till you got it in the hangar.
You got it. Never stop flying it right up to the hangar.
Exactly.
Yeah, they used to say if you're flying a T6, you'll either ground loop one or you're going to ground loop one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mike, what's your experience with it? You've got a lot of time.
Well, I'm lucky. I'm in the category of I'm gonna ground loop one. I haven't done it yet, so. But I echo the comments. It's squirrely and a crosswind, and you really got to stay ahead of it. So.
Right. Back to Korea, Alex. You had how many? 56 missions, 36 missions in North Korea.
Yeah.
What were your missions, and describe them to us?
Well, basically what we did is we had a Army officer in the back seat. And we'd go out and either the ground liaison officer would call us on the radio and tell us about some target, give us the coordinates of the target. We'd go look at it and decide whether it was a target that we could take care of from the air or whether it wasn't. Or else we'd go look and see if we could find anything. And the fighters would check in with us. And
now, what were the fighters that were checking in with you?
84s, 86s, Corsairs, Sky Raiders, everything.
Wow. So, and what kind of munitions were you carrying?
See those little 2.75 rockets there?
Yeah.
That's all we had. All we did was mark the target. If the fighter pilot couldn't see the target, and we described where to look, and usually they could find it. If they couldn't, why, we would sometimes go in and mark it with a white phosphorus Willie Peter rocket. Gives a big plume of white out of it, and then say, well, it's 10 meters north of that or south of that or whatever. And they'd say, okay, I got the target. We'd say, okay, make your pass from east to west, break north. I put in a flight of ADs one time, and the squadron leader, they'd taken off down south. The squadron leader said he couldn't find a target. We had a terrible time. And finally he said, I think I got it. And I said, well, okay, roll in. If you don't have it, don't release any ammunition. If you're sure you don't have it. He says, I've been climbing since I left my base. I'm going to drop a 2,000-pound bomb on this pass. If I don't drop it, I can't pull out. Well, lucky enough, he had the target.
So where were you based, and how far north, if you were flying in the north, did you have to fly? Where were you based?
We were at K-47, which was, I don't know, it wasn't too far south of the DMZ, or what became the DMZ.
Right.
Our missions usually lasted just a little over 2.5 hours, just short of 3 hours. And we covered the east coast and the middle of Korea, and the other squadron covered the middle and the west coast. So,
George, did you fly the T6 anymore after you trained in it?
No, I trained in San Angelo, and then we went to advanced training in a couple of bases, one in West Texas at Lubbock, and then the one I went to was at Enid, Oklahoma, which is an advanced training to this day in the U.S. Air Force. And we flew the B-25 a little bit, and then they said, okay, all you guys that have been qualified to go to fighters, we're going to put you back in the T6. So I got another 100 hours in the T6 up in Enid, Oklahoma. And they turned us loose. As a matter of fact, one quick story, I got a new instructor pilot, and he had never flown the T6 before. And so he said to we 4 aviation cadets, I'm here for you guys to check me out, the T6, because by that time we had about 130, 150 hours. And he said, by the way, I'm supposed to become an instructor pilot in this thing, and if you guys ground loop or cause an accident, you're going to get washed out. So he said, okay, who's going to be first? We all sat on our hands. He finally looked at me and he said, how about you? And so I took him up, and we made the round. He had to do touch and goes to show him everything. He's in the back seat. and stuff like that, and then taxi over to the grass to where my other 3 colleagues were. And I want to tell you, I landed that thing very gently. I didn't do a 3-point landing. I touched it down on the wheels, and luckily everything was just fine. I taxied it over the grass, put the locks on, the brakes, and climbed out, gave him a salute, jumped off the back end of the airplane. The next guy was in line, and I went over there and said, wow. Well, that was the biggest test I had in aviation. Yeah.
Alan, when you hear things like these stories, with all your T6 time, what goes through your head when you start hearing these tales?
I can relate to all that, just having put so many hours in them, and the airplane can be humbling. The one thing flying and I forgot my manners. This is my son Brandon is standing with us, but
hey, Brandon.
Yeah. Anyway, but the T6 is one of those airplanes you'll fly it, and it'll just be, everything's going good, and all of a sudden, just out of the blue, it'll swerve or do something you wonder, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And it's an airplane. If you ever get complacent, it will bite you in a hurry. As long as everything's going, good, and it will give you almost kind of a sense of false confidence that, this thing's nothing to it, and then all of a sudden something will happen. So you just got to stay on your toes.
Mike, with NATA, with teaching, when did they start teaching or qualifying people to fly formation?
So with people buying T6s, one of our friends calls it the gateway drug to fighters. You have to get a couple hundred hours in T6s before you can move on to something bigger. That's usually an insurance requirement. But basically our entrance criteria is you got to have about 50 hours in the airplane. We don't check the logbooks, but the 50 hours before you start formation training with us is to make sure you know how to fly your own airplane. Some of our instructors aren't certified flight instructors. They're just excellent formation instructors. So, and we're not, the backseaters are not the pilot in command ever. So some of our instructors aren't there to teach the guy how to fly. So the requirement is you got to know how to fly your own airplane, handle your emergencies, land it with wheels and with the 3-point. And then we get them going into a syllabus. The first flight we give every formation guy is called an eval flight. It's a single ship with an instructor, and we make sure they know how to stall and accelerated stall and recover and do a couple landings to make sure we can feel comfortable in the back. And then we put them in 2-ship. When they're good with that, we put them in 4-ship, and then we give them a check ride. It takes about maybe 8 to 10, maybe 20 sorties, depending on the skill of the pilot.
How challenging is formation flying?
Well, that's a tough question. This is the guy to answer that one. It's 2 points in space that are moving, and the cliche is you're never in position. You're moving from out of position through in position to out of position again. So it's kind of like a 3-dimensional dynamic thing. And I guess the trick, and you guys have mastered it, is to get those diversions down to a 1-foot box, so you keep your head in the same 1-foot box, and then to the ground it looks like you never move. But I can tell you they're always moving relative to each other. So yeah. How hard is it? You like driving a car on the highway. You learn it after a while, and then almost becomes second nature.
Yeah. What, Alex, you were just nodding about that, but how much formation flying did you do, not only in T6 but later?
Well, a lot, but at Craig Air Force Base in Alabama, Selma, Alabama, after I graduated from Goodfellow. And we went in there to fly the 51. So we flew the T6 for another 60 hours or something like that. Then we went into the 51. And the only thing we flew from then on was formation, basically, in the 51, and some instrument flying in the T6. And that was basically the whole rest of the pilot training until we got our wings. And then I went, and this is what I was telling you, that I was privileged to fly the T6 in combat. That was not a privilege. I flew the 51 for a year, became combat qualified in the 51. I was going to Korea as a P-51 pilot. I got to Korea. They said, oh, we don't have 51s anymore. We got rid of the last of them. How much jet time do you have? They said, how about 0? T6s. And everybody, the first thing they'd ask you when you got to the squadron is, how did you screw up that you're here? Because it was, at that time, considered the bottom of the whole row was flying the T6.
So, Bob, you flew so many different airplanes, including Navy. How did you wind up getting an exchange as a naval aviator?
Well, it was a Department of Defense pilot exchange program, purpose of which to seek commonality and understand the missions of our sister services, and being able to report on things where more commonalities, such as ground power units and other kinds of things, which were unique to certain services, and make those more important. Also tactics, operational communications, all that sort of stuff. So that was the essence of the Department of Defense Pilot Exchange Program, and I was privileged to be assigned to a Navy unit, Naval Air Station Miramar, and I went to what they called the Fleet Replacement Program at Crusader College, F-8 Crusader College, Top Gun School at Navy Miramar. And so I took several weeks of training there, Carqualled on the USS Coral Sea with 5-day and 5-night. A little story in between there. We got our 5-day traps done. We had supper and wardroom mess, and then we had the briefing by the operations officer for our 5-night qualifications. There were 7 of us. 2 commanders who had fighter squadron units waiting for them to report in as skippers, 1 lieutenant commander, one Navy captain, and a couple of junior officers and me. And so the operations officer said, okay, night carrier operations are exactly like daytime carrier operations, except it's dark as hell and you can't see anything. That was the briefing. And he said, the order of night carrier will be the 2 senior instructors and the 2 senior student commanders going to be squadron commanders, the lieutenant commander, the lieutenant, the junior officers. Air Force, you're going to be dead last because we want to make sure it's very dark when you take your...
Yeah,
If I could just interject, I just can't help this, but as a Navy guy, it does my heart proud to hear an Air Force general talk so lovingly about carrier life. Thank you for that.
Well, the Navy would often, or you know, the unwashed might say, well, how was it landing on a carrier? What does an Air Force guy say? It was a piece of cake, of course.
Sure.
But
Well,
we were very well trained in Navy operations, and in that particular fighter, it was an honor and a privilege. And had 2 combat tours on Yankee Station. Unfortunately, we lost some people, 2 skippers in a span of 3 weeks, 2 JOs, my wingman on a night carrier landing, but it was an honor and a privilege to fly with the United States
What
Navy.
was the first time piece of cake landing on the boat? What was it like the first time you looked down at the carrier and knew that you didn't have an instructor in the airplane with you and you were going to land on that little thing?
Well, it was awesome, and here's the ship going this way, and you know the angled deck is 11 degrees off the direction that the ship is going. So you're always correcting. You always go across the wake, and you're correcting to go into land here 11 degrees off while the ship is moving like this. But you have directions from the Fresnel lands and the landing signal officer, the LSO paddles, they call them, and so on. So the procedures were very clear. You follow the procedures. You do what you're supposed to do. You factor that in with your Air Force training, and everything goes well. And by the way, by the time I went on exchange, I had about 3,000 hours of flying time. So that was an advantage. I mean, I'd been a fighter pilot for quite a while and flown in different environments, including the RCAF or NATO.
Right.
And yeah.
Mike, as he explains this, as an Air Force guy explaining the Navy procedures, you know, you're operations officer, OPSO on a carrier, and so you've got, what did I say, 555 traps? My gosh. But what is that? How do you describe that experience, and how is it different from what Air Force guys do landing on runways?
Well, as a Navy captain to an Air Force general, you got it exactly right, sir. Nice job. And he did. It was exactly the right experience. So it's an incredible thing to experience day and night. And over time, you get a little more comfortable with it. You know, you don't realize it when you're doing it, but we all live at certain points on the stress performance curve, where as stress increases to some maximum point, your performance falls off. So you want to stay near the top or maybe the left side of that curve. And over time, I think we get more and more comfortable with day landings. It actually becomes fun. We actually want to go out and do more of it. Bag traps, we call it. Nobody ever asked to get extra landings at night. You know, that's usually it's a lot less moving parts. It's a straight-in approach on needles, but it's a deprivation of sensory input, which I think is the stressor.
At night,
yeah. All you can see is the two-dimensional lineup for left and right and glide slope for up and down. You really can't see the ship at all. It's dark, so you see the lineup and you see the vertical, but you don't have any perception of depth to the carrier. And at some point, you stop looking at your instruments and you just focus visually on the meatball and lineup. And it's not till the last about 4 or 5 seconds where the low light deck lights start to become visible, and you see the island go by, and you catch a wire. So it's
Alan, how jealous are you that you never got to do that?
I would love to have had the opportunity. I'd like to kind of interject, though. You know, here we are, 80 years. You know, and it is such a wonderful trader. Something we hadn't talked about. In my experience, flying the T6. I was, you know, in my early 20s, and my dad had bought the S&J that I flew in the air shows for years, had bought it, and he bought the T6 in 73, and then we ended up with a Mustang in 79, and I started flying the T6 in the early 80s, and since my dad had started flying the Mustang, the T6 kind of sat in the back of the hangar and started collecting dust, and we had a Stearman at that time. I started flying it. I'd been flying a Cub, and I said, I sure would like to fly that T6 a little bit. And he goes, well, you know how to start it? And I said, well, I think I can figure it. He handed me the book. He said, read the book, go fly the thing. And that was my checkout in the T6. I just read the book, and we had a 2,500-foot grass strip down the country, and I just got in and started flying it. And wow. So anyway, over about a year and a half, 2 years, I ended up with about 35 hours at that time in the T6. And I kind of said the same thing about flying the Mustang. And he goes, well, you got a book? And he said, read the book and go fly it. And anyway, so I got in this Mustang, and like I said, I had like 35 hours in the T6. And went out there and did everything the manual said do. And went out and flew the airplane. And I got a big surprise when I ran it down the runway the first time at about 40 inches. And I didn't get the tail up. I just wanted to make sure I could keep it straight down the runway, and everything seemed pretty good. So I went taxi back, and I had a little bit of a wind from the left, which that bit me in a few seconds later. That bit me, but I rolled the canopy forward. And I said, all right, I went to about 40 inches and got going down the runway. So I went in and shoved it up to about 55, and not being able to see that well over the nose, I popped the tail up. And of course, I had that left wind and plus the gyroscopic precession. I popped the tail up. That thing made a left turn, and I'm sitting there pushing all I could do on the right rudder, and I'm headed toward the edge of the runway. And anyway, by the time I got to the edge of the runway, I got off the ground, and I was like, "Phew, you idiot! What have you done this time?" And anyway, so I took off and flew the airplane, did some air work, did some stalls and stuff. And I thought, well, since I got it in the air, I don't know how it's going to be on landing. And so I went and buzzed everybody I knew, because I said, at least I got to fly it one time. And I came back in and entered the pattern and, did everything the book said. Came in to land, flared, and it just kissed on just as such a sweet. And when I got on the ground and rolled out, the back of my mind, I was going, that was so familiar, because I'd flown the T6 first. And it did what it was supposed to do. The T6 is such a great trainer, getting you ready for high-performance tail dragger fighters. It did what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. Alex, compare from your experience flying the T6 to, say, the P-51 or other propeller-driven aircraft.
Well, I think Al is absolutely right. The T6 prepares you for that 51. And flying a 51 is kind of like having a convertible and 300 horsepower engine and driving down the interstate at 140 miles an hour. That's what it's like. You couldn't want anything better.
Right. Is it more difficult or easier to fly than the T6?
It's different. I don't think it's either easier or harder. It's just different. It's a little more powerful. You got more rudder problems because of the big engine and that, but it's a little easier on landing, I think, than a T6 is. Yeah. So 6 to 1 half does the other two.
Bob, what about you? Compare the 6 to other aircraft you flew.
Well, I think as the Brits and the Canucks named it the Harvard, it prepares you for future aviation. And it does so in one heck of a great way because of the particular characteristics of flying the T6. And you have to pay attention to what you're doing all the time because of some of these little tricky situations that evolve from nowhere, right? And you have to be prepared.
After I got back from Korea flying the T6 over there, they sent me to basic instructor school in the T-28. Tricycle gear, I mean, it was like nothing, just sitting there.
Yeah.
Compared to the T6 or the 51. T-28 was a piece of cake. It was like those carrier landings, piece of cake.
George,
I wanted to go to the Mustang so bad.
George, did you ever fly any other North American products, the T-28 or B-25 or anything?
No. I flew the B-25 for about 40 hours in aviation cadets at Enid, Oklahoma. Most of which was gotten on cross countries and stuff like that, navigation training. It was a good navigation training. And
Alec, you flew a bunch of the North American
training. I flew all of the NATA airplanes. Not much time in the B-25. That was when I decided I didn't want to be in the Air Force. I wanted to go in the Guard and fly fighters.
Yeah.
So George, also your naval experience flying combat in Vietnam. Yeah. What springs to mind as your most memorable experiences flying combat in Vietnam?
Well, I think a couple of things I mentioned. The second cruise, first cruise is on the USS Kitty Hawk, which, as they would call it, a big deck aircraft carrier in the Constellation class. And on the second cruise, the Navy doesn't go to war, they go on cruises during which you might get shot at a lot, you understand that. And we were then reassigned because the Vietnam thing was going on pretty strong. From Air Wing 11, hence the 3-digit 111, Fighter Squadron 11, we were reassigned to Air Wing 2, 2-digit, which was based out of Alameda, California. So all the stuff after cruise come back from the standard 9-month cruise, Westpac on USS Kitty Hawk became an 11.5-month cruise, and then just a couple months later, we're on our way out with USS Midway, which was built during World War II and waning days of World War II, and it was built in 3 sections. So it had 3 section stuff on the deck, and hence the Midway had its own unique characteristics going through the water, and in heavy seas, over 5 or 6, what the Navy would characterize as a sea state, and you get up to higher numbers, it would do kind of a midway dance, we would call it. Front section would do one thing, the rear section would do something else, and the middle section didn't know what was going on. The purpose of the 3 compartments was in case of a strike by torpedoes or bombs in World War II, they could seal that section off and deal with it and still keep the other stuff going. Hence, we did have some rough seas, and to answer your question, was bringing my wingman back from a night mission, a daytime, nighttime strike. And as we were coming in, you can take off 2 or 3 or 4, but you can only land 1 at a time. And so you bring the wingman in, and as soon as he calls the ball, which Mike described, then the leader goes around, changes frequencies, and comes around and lands. So I trapped, and I could tell that deck was moving an awful lot, and you could hardly walk it. So I asked for permission when I found out that old Nick was still airborne, and he was the youngest JO in the squadron, the least amount of time. Asked permission to the skipper to go out to the platform where the LSO is. And we were taking water in the hangar deck, and you had to go there to get up on. And there was room for just 3 guys on the LSO thing. Nick came in, got a wave off because just as he got in close, it went down, front end went up. The Air Force kind of had the inland stuff, and we had the stuff about middle of the way up the Gulf of Tonkin. One memorable mission was taking a flight of 4, 2 Crusaders and 2 A-3 Skyhawks from VA-23 up to about 30 miles short of that other big country. And then we got on the Northeast Railroad and came down, and voila, it was an early morning thing, just breaking day, and here's a locomotive with 6 cars loaded with ammo. So I said, here we go, guys, and I got the locomotive, which exploded just like a picture out of World War II film, and the other guys started working on the rail cars. And in the afternoon strike, there was smoke going up 30,000 feet from that. So that was an exciting example of it.
It puts in perspective the fact that one of the reasons we're able to be here is because of men like this and their colleagues who have gone to war, fought war, many gave up their lives so that we could have the freedoms we have and that we can be here at Oshkosh today.
Yeah, thank you.
Mike, again, repeat for us the afternoon plan, would you, for all the NA
Sure will, yeah. So the warbird, about 63 of us or so are going to brief at noon, but if you notice out to your right shoulders, there's about 28 T6s in a parking area called Warbird Alley, and those 28 T6s are going to taxi out and take off in front of the crowd heading south as part of our show. Everybody else is going to launch on runway 27, but I think the shows, go to the whole show, but I think the NATA part of the show is starting at about 3:30. So it's going to be featuring the T6s. The 28 ship formation is going to go by in a big arrowhead, and about 13 minutes later, they're going to come 80. It's a digital 80, so they practiced it a bunch of times down in Dubuque, Iowa at our big formation clinic. The flight leads have the authority to change the formation back to the arrowhead if they don't like the way it looks. So we're briefing and planning the 80 pass as our centerpiece. And around all of those things with the big ship, there'll be about 10 more T6s a mile behind those guys because we've got so many qualified guys they want to fly. The T-28s will be going east and west at 3,000 feet overhead the crowd. We'll have the Geico SkyTyper team up at 8,500 feet, and they're going to type a little message to you all. And we've got Aeroshell joining us. They're going to hang out in a hold pattern until the box is clear. We're going to call them in to do a few maneuvers. So it's not just going to be straight and level formation flybys. We also have the Canadian Harvard aerobatic team, which is, they're flying, of course, the Harvards. Dave Hewitt's the skipper of that team.
Snowbirds, yeah.
Well, the Geico SkyTypers, Aeroshell, and the Canadian Harvard, they're the three, and the Trojan Thunder. We got the T-28 Trojan Thunder team. So we're going to have some maneuvering in the box with some North American formation acts, and the rest of us are going to be going through straight and level, just demonstrating the formations. So we're excited about it. The EAA folks have been very generous to NATA and gave us almost an hour of the show. The 1938 was the first flight of the T6, September of 38, the prototype first flew. So we call that the birthday. And this is the 80th anniversary, September of this year. So this was our big celebration at Oshkosh. And in that year, 1938, Kate Smith sang for the very first time, "God Bless America." Yeah. So if we get the timing right, we'll have Kate Smith belting out that iconic song about the time the 80 goes over. And if we don't get the timing right, it'll be done when the Harvard or the T-28s go by. But we're trying to make it right. Yeah. So we're going to have a great time celebrating the T6 and the whole NATA family today.
George?
David, if I can make one more comment and pay respects to the Royal Canadian Air Force. I was privileged to be on exchange with them, but they sent an air division over to NATO and their mission was 4 words: top cover for NATO, which they did with great vigor and alacrity. And they built on license from North American Canadair, and they lightened the airplane by 1,000 pounds. They put the Arenda 14 engine in it because they had this mission for top cover for NATO, and 2,200 pounds more thrust. So hence, they did their mission there with great vigor. And they had an air division, 2 wings in France, 2 wings in Germany. And it was a real honor to fly with our brethren, the Spats.
General Alex, General George, Alan, Mike, thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
David, I got one more comment if I could.
Alan? Yeah.
Well, here we are 80 years later, and there's 2 or 3 things that are the key pivotal things why we still have T6s flying in the number we do today. One, of course, is the technology. We're 1930s, early 40 technology. It's like trying to keep a 1950 Chevrolet truck going. It's just a very simple airplane. The second is a testimony to the 1340 Pratt & Whitney engine. It's probably the best engine that Pratt & Whitney has ever produced, bar none. We fly the airplanes, at max power during the show, and then we file IFR and go home. And we run the things 1,400 hours between overhaul. It's just a fantastic power plant. If you can't power it successfully and reliably, then the airplanes don't last. And then the third thing, North American, I've never flown a North American airplane that didn't fly good. Their engineers and designers and test pilots, they got it right the first time on all their equipment. And it's just a wonderful airplane. And it'll be around another 80 years, I hope.
We're already planning the 100th in 20 years.
Yeah.
Great.
Could I give a closing?
Mike, please do, Mike.
I wanted to say our organization's got 1,000 members. Probably 700, we think, are owner-operators, pilots. Some have Comanches and Stearmans, but a vast majority own some North American trainer aircraft. Our website is flynata.org. We have a great community. If you're interested in the warbirds and you want to just see what's going on, you can log into the forums. You can kind of get connected to the chatter about carburetor adjustments or how do you stop from ground looping or whatever. We've got a great online classifieds. We've got phenomenal sponsors. So NATA appreciates it. If you take a look at the website, feel free to join. You do not have to be a pilot. We'll try to talk you into that once you fall in love with it, but because that's how it works. So, David, thank you so much for hosting this, by the way.
This is my pleasure, believe me. This is a privilege. Now, the show continues with Sam Bass. Sam's an extraordinary aviator with over 35,000 hours as a pilot, and he's going to talk with Mike and I think Alan or whoever wants to talk about these airplanes right now. Sam, it's all yours.
I want to talk to Mike here just a little bit. He's going to tell us a little bit. Can you stand up for us, Mike? Okay. First of all, we want to recognize the people that own these particular airplanes. The T6 over here is Jack Larson. LTA-6G here is that's Confederate Air Force, or that commemorative Air Force, excuse me. Dixie Wing. And the Harvard over on this side is Bruce Ames. Actually, I want you to tell us a little bit about what's the difference between these particular
Well, I guess and I'll beg anybody to correct me, I certainly am not the expert on the North American factory history, but the differences between the T6 and the SNJ, I think, were which service bought it coming off the production line. So this lot went to the Navy, they got painted SNJ, and this lot went to the Air Force or Army Air Corps, and they got painted AT6. The Harvards were, the demand signal for the airplane was so great that North American licensed the Canadian Car and Foundry Company to build the airplanes up in Canada. So the Canadians improved upon the design a little bit. You'll notice a couple of differences. One, they don't have any gear doors like the T6s and the Mosquitoes and S&Js, so there's no landing gear doors. I think that might have been because of the mud and freezing on in the cold weather Canadian ops, and then it would jam up the gear doors when they bring it up. The other thing you'll notice is a much longer exhaust pipe on the right side compared to these guys. It might be hard to see, but a T6 exhaust pipe right over there on that NAS Glenview airplane is a pretty short stub. The Canadians extended it to bring some hot air into the back seat for the cold weather operations. Flying-wise, they're the identical airframe, but the Canadians have a rounded stick on top of it. I think the mixture to go rich is you pull it back. I never could figure that out, but we go mixture rich forward, they go mixture rich back. So American T6 pilots figure that out pretty quick when they try to take off when the engine shuts down. It's a self-fixing problem.
How about the Mosquito here now?
So the Mosquito was what Alec McDonald flew in Korea. This was the T6G models. Towards the end of the 40s, North American was still on license to support so many services around the country, countries flying this in their air forces. So North American was remanufacturing a bunch of the older T6s into the G model. And there was a few differences. The G model had the same 1,000 PSI hydraulic system, but you didn't have to push a separate lever to get the gear up.
It's like a P-51.
Exactly. It's just like a It had the P-51 tailwheel mod, as a matter of fact. But they had the gun, but they also wired it for the bombs and rockets. So the G model, the Mosquitoes, were the LTA-6Gs, they called them. And it was basically the same airframe. I think they had a 30-millimeter cannon on the nose and the capability to shoot the rockets, like the general said. And I know they could drop some bombs as well.
And I think the canopy was also this is not a G
That's
canopy.
Right. No, he's got a good point there.
That's a G canopy on the back.
Yeah, it's a subtle difference, but the NAS Glenview airplane and the Harvard have the 3 large panes of glass on the canopy, and you'll see this one has more of a birdcage look. So that's how you can tell. This one was remanufactured and painted up like a mosquito, but this was probably an SNJ5 or a T6D model because of that bird cage. And these were probably G models when they were built because of the windows. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your information. And
Sam,
we
thank
really
you so
enjoyed
much.
it. Yeah,
And former NATA member was one of the single-digit members way back when, and we thank you for your membership.
Well, we started,
Yeah.
I've had 3 of them over the years, and I think I was telling Mike earlier, it's a little funny story is that when I first went in the Air Force, we were the last class to fly T6s. They went to the T-34, which was simple. But anyway, I got in this airplane, and I had 20 hours total time. That was all I had. And to me, it was the biggest airplane I'd ever seen, and sometimes even today. But anyway, I was in my airline career, and I was checking out on the 747, and my instructor said, "You're just about to get in the biggest airplane you're ever going to get into." And I said, "Oh, no, it's not." He said, "There's nothing bigger than this." I said, "A T6 is, if you don't know how to fly." It is still that way. But it's a great airplane to fly. I've had 3 of them. I love them.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for everything at Warbirds of America. We appreciate it being here, folks.
Thanks, folks. We really appreciate it.
People who come to air shows want to see, it's right on your point there. They want to see the jet teams, whether it's the Navy or the Air Force, we got the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels. Well, what do they want to see next? Well, they either want to see current military aircraft or former military aircraft. Oh, warbirds. When something like that's going on, I get the hair standing up and I feel the pride and the excitement. I'm feeling something. Well, that's what I think the warbirds are about. They're old, gorgeous, big, beautiful, historical planes, and boy, oh boy, when the engine fires up and that noise is going on, a big round radial, or the Merlin on a Mustang, and they fly by, and whistling death, and of course you're driving down, you hear that whistle going on. Those are things you never forget. Oh, and then because you were introduced to them, now you want to go back and hear them again. Well, my name is Jim Olzaki. I'm the new and current president of Warbirds of America. And I have been involved with warbirds since the early 80s. Have been involved with getting Bob Pond's museum started in Flying Cloud Field outside of Minneapolis, and a member of and volunteering for the Warbirds of America ever since then. I had a little hiatus when I made a move back to Connecticut, but that was for a short period of time while I was getting resituated. As a result of being involved with Bob Pond, I was exposed to a full assortment of warbirds, and the more I was exposed to them, the deeper I got with falling in love and wanting to be part of it. And Bob Pond was so involved in wanting to share them with the public that it was just an easy connection for me. And together we had the museum up and running and recognized worldwide, and in a book, and going off to air shows and sharing them with other people. That's one of the things I want to try to focus on during my term, is we have to understand how many of our members out there are people who are not necessarily pilots or owners or owning pilots. They're passionate warbird fans. They want to read about them. They want to follow the history. They want to see them. They want to hear them. There's a ton of folks like that. And after I had finished up my time with Bob Pond's museum, and the cause for that was that I was in corporate America and transferred back to the Northeast and working in the home office in Stamford, Connecticut. I still wanted to stay involved, so I kept going back to AirVenture and going back to Bob's museum and being exposed to the planes. And it was really during that period of time when I was a little bit separated from all of that, that I really started to understand and watch and see and observe people and hear them talking to their kids and their cousins and their uncles about, well, Grandpa used to fly this plane, or I used to fly this plane. You know, one of my favorite stories is that we had Bob Pond's B-25 at AirVenture one year, and I just happened to be standing by it. And maybe a little segue story. I pretty much kept my nose out of Bob Pond's paint scheme picking when he was acquiring and restoring the different warbirds. But when he got to B-25, I wrote him a formal letter asking him to paint and honor the most accomplished B-25 in my dad's squadron. My dad was in B-25s in the South Pacific in World War II. And Bob acknowledged that, and he painted the plane as Mitch the Witch. And I'm standing by Mitch the Witch at AirVenture, and comes this elderly gentleman and his family. And I'm watching him from maybe 20 yards away, and he's kind of normal walking, and then you see his eyes kind of look at the plane, and his pace picks up, and he was darn near in a trot when he got close to the plane. He says, "There's my plane, there's my plane." It turns out that he was on the original Mitch the Witch crew, and he was in tears. That's what it's about, people who are passionate. Well, like so many things, but especially history, it is easy to forget, not be exposed to, not understand what was going on in the world back then, and what the aviation meant, and what the greatest generation did to provide us with the freedoms we now enjoy today. And so we're just caretakers of these planes, but we're really caretakers of history. And there's so many kids out there that you can ask a historical question, especially as you go back to the World War II era. They don't even know what you're talking about. So the onus is on us to present that and make that available and try to help them understand, you know, these are memories that we need to keep on forever and honor what the greatest generation did for us to give us these freedoms. And that's also what the pilots, the owners and the pilot owners are doing as well. They're sharing those planes as caretakers for them and trying to make that available to more of the general public. I had been involved with Bob Pond's Planes and the museum and helped form it and create it and run it. And then I retired from corporate America down to Florida, and it didn't take long before I was reconnected with Link Dexter, Hall of Famer for Warbirds of America, and we started talking and chatting. Of course, he knew about my history, and that's kind of where it all started. He said, hey, we need somebody to take over the local Warbird Squadron, which is Warbird Squadron 24, which covers all the state of Florida. And, so I said, well, sure, I would do that. So we kind of took that over and built that squadron up to a sizable one, as sizes go for the Warbird squadrons. And I was pretty involved with that. And I knew John Baugh, another legend in Warbirds of America, and we got to know each other better and spending more time together. And he kept asking me questions and suggesting things about my involvement with Oshkosh and AirVenture and Warbirds on a national scale. And next thing I know, John had talked behind the scenes to Harold Cannon, who was the president of Warbirds at that time. And I got a call from Harold Cannon. He said, well, how would you like to join the board? Well, okay, that sounded like something that would allow me to step up everything I just spoke to and that I believe in and spread it further than Florida. So here I am, I'm on the board and we're marching along and I'm getting more involved. And I got involved with Jim Tobel, and the two of us kind of chaired and ran the Sun and Fun fly-in Warbird effort. And it kind of moved off to a new level. We wanted to reinvent ourselves and get more involvement for East Coast and Southeast Coast members. And that's another part of the equation here. We want to expose ourselves to more and more members and membership. So all of a sudden, Warbirds became way more involved with Sun and Fun. Sun and Fun had some of its biggest, better years. And I guess that success kind of led to internal talking. And Connie, the former president, and we had some discussions. And she said, okay, I've done my part. I've done 2 terms. It's time to step down. Who wants to step up? The next thing I know, John Baugh's in the background again and talking to folks. And they said, would I like to try it? And here I am. It seemed like a daunting task, but it seemed like something I just needed to give a run at. So one of the things that, Connie's got a lot of foresight and seeing ahead. She said, well, if Zach, if you're going to get more involved, maybe the next thing we should do is get you introduced to all the things that are going on behind the scenes. And there's no better place to do that than at AirVenture, because all the pieces are moving and trying to coordinate with each other. So kind of 2 things happened at the same time. I was asked and accepted taking on a review of our committee structure and talk about, I'll call it a job description, but what the committee was about and who was running it and who the people were on it. And in order to do that, that's when I went around during AirVenture and introduced myself to the people and tried to understand how they worked with it. And that's when you begin to understand that if you're just a member out there or involved in a squadron or volunteering at a local level, you probably don't realize how much is going on with Warbirds of America and what they're doing on behalf of the membership to keep the Warbird movement alive and well. And so, yes, that's exactly right. Warbirds in Review. We had the new youth center, and, what's going on with safety. I went over on the other side of the field when the air show was going on to see just how much is going on behind the scenes. There's a lot going on. And I think, you asked, is there anything, how would I like to change it, alter it, modify it, improve it? And then you reflected, say, well, maybe it's not improved, but what can I do to add my touch to it? Well, I think we're talking about what I can do. I think we want to try to let membership know how much is going on. If you talk about the other aviation groups out there, you could kind of put them in a specific cubicle and say, well, they're about this one thing and they're about just that one thing. If you step back and look at what Warbirds of America is about, it's about a lot of things in a lot of places to a lot of people. And we're trying to hold that all together. And I think the challenge there is that we're all getting older. The planes are getting older. The older you get, either people are passing away or they don't have the energy to keep this, the effort that you have to put into both mentally and physically to do all of this. So, that was when it all kind of hit me. So here I am, the president now. Interestingly enough, so here we are with the pandemic and having virtual meetings and putting things on the media. And when I was back in my corporate career, one of the things a lot of my mentors said, you'll find it written in books, sometimes challenges are really opportunities. So I thought back one day, look at this. What is the opportunity we have here? Well, we're enjoying that opportunity right now as I speak to you. So there's a lot more virtually going on. Why? Because we can't meet physically. Well, maybe that's good. Maybe we need to do more digital, more computer connections, more virtual meetings. That way we can share ourselves more with our membership. What does that mean? Well, now we can tell our membership, here's all the fronts we operate on, and maybe you didn't realize it. What are we doing in Washington with government affairs? What are we doing with the FAST program for formation and keeping all of our warbird folks understanding and involved and represented in formation and safety training FAST? What are we doing with the ACE program and the people who have the aerobatic competency, and how are we involved with that? You keep going along the board. What are we doing to put on this huge warbird piece of air venture for the EAA at Oshkosh? What are we doing at Sun and Fun? What do we do when we have NWAC? What do we do when we go to the Reno Air Races? There is so much going on. I think the next step we can take is to help our membership understand those pieces, maybe report to them on those pieces. And quite frankly, maybe somewhere along the way, we give ourselves a report card. First of all, the ICAS, the International Council of Air Shows, they get together and they put together surveys at all of the different air shows around the country, and they ask questions to the people when they're leaving. And so what are the people who come to air shows want to see? It's right on your point there. Well, they want to see the jet teams, whether it's the Navy or the Air Force, and we got the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels. Well, what do they want to see next? Well, they either want to see current military aircraft or former military aircraft. Oh, warbirds. So the other half of the answer to that question is, well, I remember when I was a kid, and my mom and dad would take me to the local parade, which was usually over a veterans event or something. And here comes the band. And that big bass drum is pounding in your chest. And your hair's, well, as a kid, I probably didn't have hair on my arms to stand up. But when something like that's going on, I get the hair standing up and I feel the pride and the excitement. I'm feeling something. Well, that's what I think the warbirds are about. They're old, gorgeous, big, beautiful, historical planes. And boy, oh boy, when the engine fires up and that noise is going on, a big round radial, or the Merlin on a Mustang, and they fly by, and whistling death, and the Corsairs driving down, you hear that whistle going on. Those are things you never forget. Oh, and then because you were introduced to them, now you want to go back and hear them again. I think that more than anything else is why the people, one of the first things I want to do is get down to the warbird area. What did they bring this year? Only one of them or two of them are flying, and one's here this year. And every year there's one of those, or more than one of those warbirds. So you just got to get down there and not miss it. probably a good place to talk about Warbirds in Review. Connie brought us Warbirds in Review. It's got bigger and better every year, and you can pick a segment of a particular day looking on the schedule. And not only is that plane here this year, but it's rolled over to Warbirds in Review, and we've got a former pilot, historian, and owner, and Dave Hartman talking about the history of that plane right there in front of you. So there it is in a nutshell. Two names that everybody should know out there is Bill Fisher, the executive director, and Kristen, his right-hand person as the administrative assistant. They do above and beyond the call of duty. They have a list of whatever they've been doing for years, and then somebody comes up with a new idea, and they're the first to find ways to support it and try to expand on it or introduce us to how we might electronically, digitally move in that direction, because they've got experiences in that area, or they know someone over in EAA who has experience in that area. So they're the first two people that our membership and people who might be interested in the membership should contact and ask questions. They'd be happy to and very willing to point you in the direction of someone on the board who may be a little more experienced and knowledgeable in an area where your question is coming from. So of course, then we've got the executive committee, and then we've got the officers. Right? We've got the beauty of the board. For a starter, the beauty of the board is that there's very little turnover. So the people who are on the board understand what the board is about, understand what Warbirds of America is about, and they're not new at it. Because of the passion across the board, somebody's got a plane, they're trying to put it together, and it's a model, and they're looking at some broken part, and they're saying, Jesus, I didn't even know what this is. Probably the first thing they do is send pictures somewhere, and oh yeah, I know what that is. Only in the N model did they have that, and oh, by the way, there's only one N model in existence, and that's over at so-and-so's place. Well, you give so-and-so a call, and the first thing he does is he realizes somebody else is passionate, trying to put it together, and he's got the only N model. Now, I'm not going to guarantee you every owner would do this, but a lot of them will. The next thing you find out is they cook a deal, and they say, hey, look, I'll pay for the expense. And the guy says, I'm willing to take that part out of my airplane. I will box it up and send it to you. You go take it to your local machinist, you have them duplicate it, you get yourself one custom made. I don't want to talk about what the cost of that might be, but, and then send it back to me, and I'll put it back in my plane. And that has happened over and over again. And I think that really speaks to the subject and the question that you asked. The people are so passionate about it, they want to jump for joy that somebody else is as passionate as they are. They want to jump for joy that someone else is in love with the plane they are in love with, that someone else wants to have one of these planes. People just can't wait to hear someone be excited about their plane, and that you want to have one like their plane, and they want to help you have another one. Yeah. So again, let's go back to, it's not quite the beginning, it's a little bit after the beginning, but when I'm helping Bob Pond create his museum, here are the pieces, so Bob's got kind of one of everything, at least in the fighters. And, so you crawl up and you sit in the cockpit, and I can't help but tell you, you're not just looking around at the steam gauges. All of a sudden you're saying, well, geez, I wonder who sat in this cockpit. I wonder what challenges pilots who sat in this cockpit had to face. And then I start thinking about people, you kind of moving forward with your question. Well, who do I know that are legends? That Randy Sohn. Randy Sohn was one of the very busy pilots for Bob Pond's aircraft. Steve Hinton was one of the very busy pilots for Bob's. And you start thinking about, holy cow, Randy Sohn. He was a guy that took Fifi out of the desert. And, if you ever read the story, you find out, man, they weren't even sure they're going to take off and if it would keep flying. And whoa, and they did that to preserve a one-of-a-kind airplane at that time. Oh, Warbirds of America said, well, Paul started and John Baugh helped them get started and Bill Harrison helped them get started, and they found their way to the B-17. Holy cow, some people are stepping up to make these things happen. That makes you even more and more, you have to realize, holy cow, if they spent that much of their time and their passion to get us to that point, the onus is on us to keep the maintenance and the preservation of those planes. And then back to the last question, and the next guy that wants a B-17, what we learned when we got our B-17. And then what about the challenges for flying a B-17? Well, you got to talk to the Bill Harrisons and the Link Dexters, and guess who else has flown one of those? Connie Bolin. Start thinking about Connie Bolin. Holy cow. And somebody look at the list of what warbirds she's flown. And, that's a good note to leave that subject on, because the same as the preserving the airplanes, but the people, the legends, they don't see themselves as legends. They probably don't even see themselves as doing more than the average bear. They just were doing something they wanted to do, and it worked out for themselves and for someone else. And now it becomes a story to share. There's so much of that. That's a keynote on everything Warbird involved. Yeah, I think the first thing I want to tell you is that warbird back there, that was in Bob Pond's museum. And when Bob passed away, I cooked a deal with his widow to buy it. And so I'm not only flying a warbird, but I'm flying a memory that I shared with someone I became very close personal friends with. Bob and I developed a relationship where we started doing personal things on the side that were not aviation related just because we became friends. He was like a big brother. He was like a father to me. We talked about personal things. And I'm going to segue on that. You talk about my flying experience in my plane. So I'm approaching Bob in the very beginning, because he had only 5 warbirds at the time. I'm saying only, some people are happy to have 1, right? I said, have you ever thought about opening and running a museum? You've probably got the money, but don't have the time. I might have the time, but I certainly don't have the money. And, one thing led to another, and we thought alike business-wise. So he said, run with it, start a museum for me. We started building that museum. And again, like I said, since we're personal, I'm standing at the museum outside one day with Bob, and a Stearman comes taxiing up, and he turns into where you enter the museum grounds. And I turn to Bob, do you know who that is? And I'm going to kind of cheat. I always like to kind of make believe I'm Bob. So, well, Zach, as a matter of fact, I do know that Stearman is mine. I just bought it. And as you well know, anybody who ever became a warbird pilot in World War II started in a Stearman. It's now time for you to start flying a Stearman. You know, Bob had $1 million fighters. He didn't need a Stearman, though it's nice to have one. Taxiing in one day is a T6 Texan. The end of the story is that everybody who flew in a Stearman before they got in the fighters, they went to the T6. And it's time for you to start flying a T6. You know, I can't prove it, but to this day, I'm going to choose to believe that Bob and I were so close that he bought those planes so that he could watch me take the next step. And I'll never forget that. And so the last step was that I finally retired to Florida, and it was another kind of hiatus from warbirds. Well, one thing led to another. It's the little pieces of the story we don't need. But Bob passed away. I contacted the widow. Bob protected most of his collection, which is now the Palm Springs Air Museum. But there were about a half a dozen planes not inside that community. The widow and I had a couple of conversations. Steve Hinton got involved. And lo and behold, I now hold and own a warbird that was in that museum that I helped start, whatever the heck it is now, 35 years ago or something. And I'm flying it around and trying to keep that memory. And I'm flying it around, and I want to get formation involved. The guy who's training me or looking over my shoulder is involved in a demo team. Well, lo and behold, I got my formation card, and the demo team tapped me on the shoulders, and we just lost one of our members. How would you like to fly with us? So that's the answer to your question, and what I answered in the earlier question. You just keep swinging and being involved and doing what's fun, and the next thing just kind of presents itself, and then it's your option. You know, you say yes or no, and I am thankful to be lucky enough to have all these stories to tell, share, view, and you know, now it's time for me to pass that baton and try to help others have the same experiences that I've had.